In the shadows of Chicago's bustling streets, a legend was born, a man whose name would become synonymous with power, violence, and the dark underbelly of the American dream. Welcome to the story of Al Capone, the infamous gangster who rose from the gritty streets of Brooklyn to become the king of Chicago's criminal underworld. This introduction sets the tone for Al Capone's story, drawing from the information provided in the context. It creates an atmosphere of intrigue and mystery, inviting viewers to delve deeper into the life of this notorious figure. The hook emphasizes Capone's rise to power and his impact on American history, which aligns with the narrative presented in the chapter summaries. This approach should capture the audience's attention and prepare them for the dramatic tale of Capone's ascent and eventual downfall. Chapter 1. The Brooklyn Boy. Rise of a Gangster. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in 1899 to Italian immigrants in the gritty streets of Brooklyn, New York. His parents, Gabriele and Teresina Capone, had fled the poverty and violence of southern Italy, seeking the promise of a better life in America. But for young Al, the streets of his childhood would prove to be a breeding ground for a different kind of violence and ambition. From an early age, Capone displayed a penchant for trouble, a trait that would only become more pronounced as he navigated the treacherous world of street gangs in his youth. Drawn to the power and prestige that came with membership, Capone quickly rose through the ranks, earning a reputation as a skilled fighter and a ruthless enforcer. It was during these formative years that he first encountered Johnny Torrio, a seasoned mobster who would become Capone's mentor and guide him on a path that would ultimately lead to infamy. Torrio, a Chicago-based gangster, had established a foothold in the city's lucrative criminal enterprises, and he recognized Capone's potential. Impressed by the young man's intelligence, cunning, and capacity for violence, Torrio took Capone under his wing, teaching him the intricacies of the underworld and the art of building a criminal empire. As Prohibition loomed on the horizon, Torrio saw an opportunity to expand his operations and solidify his hold on the city's illicit liquor trade. Recognizing Capone's ambition and ruthlessness, he invited the young man to join him in Chicago, where the stakes were higher and the rewards more substantial. Capone, eager to prove his worth and seize the chance to forge his own path, readily accepted Torrio's offer. In 1919, at the age of 20, Capone embarked on a journey that would transform him from a street thug in Brooklyn to one of the most notorious gangsters in American history. The onset of Prohibition in 1920 would prove to be a game changer, ushering in a new era of opportunity for those willing to exploit the lucrative black market for alcohol. Capone, with Torrio's guidance, quickly adapted to the changing landscape, establishing a vast network of speakeasies, illegal breweries, and distribution channels that would form the foundation of his criminal empire. As Torrio's right-hand man, Capone learned the intricate web of bribery, intimidation, and violence that underpinned the organized crime syndicates of the era. He observed Torrio's sophisticated approach to managing the various factions and power brokers within the city, mastering the art of navigating the treacherous political landscape. Capone's rise to power was marked by a ruthless determination to eliminate any and all competition. He quickly established himself as a force to be reckoned with, using brutal tactics to eliminate rival gangs and solidify Torrio's control over the city's underworld. The young gangster's willingness to resort to violence, coupled with his cunning and business acumen, made him an invaluable asset to Torio's operations. As Capone's reputation grew, so too did his ambition. He began to envision a future where he would not merely be Torio's subordinate, but the undisputed leader of Chicago's criminal empire. The stage was set for a power struggle that would ultimately cement Capone's legacy as one of the most notorious figures in American history. The Brooklyn boy had arrived in Chicago, and his transformation from street punk to criminal mastermind had begun. The city and the nation would never be the same. Chapter 2. Chicago's new king, Capone's ascension. After his arrival in Chicago in 1919, Al Capone quickly found himself under the tutelage of Johnny Torrio, a seasoned mobster who had established a formidable criminal empire during the early years of Prohibition. Torrio recognized Capone's potential and took him under his wing, grooming the young upstart to become a key player in the city's burgeoning underworld. Capone's early years in Chicago were marked by his diligent study of Torrio's methods. He observed the older man's sophisticated approach to managing the bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution rackets that had made Torrio a wealthy and influential figure. Capone learned the importance of maintaining a veneer of respectability, cultivating political connections, and ruthlessly eliminating any threats to his organization. As Prohibition took hold, the demand for illegal alcohol skyrocketed, and Torrio's criminal empire expanded rapidly. Capone quickly proved himself to be an invaluable asset, using his cunning and brute force to eliminate rival gangs and secure a dominant position in the lucrative bootlegging trade. His willingness to engage in brutal violence, combined with his knack for organization and business acumen, made him an indispensable member of Torrio's inner circle. Capone's rise through the ranks was meteoric, and by the mid-1920s, he had become Torrio's trusted lieutenant, overseeing the day-to-day operations of the organization. The young gangster's reputation for ruthlessness and efficiency spread throughout Chicago, and he soon earned the moniker Scarface, a reference to the distinctive scar on his left cheek, the result of a knife fight in his youth. Torrio's reign, however, was not destined to last. In 1925, the aging mobster narrowly survived an assassination attempt, leaving him shaken and eager to step away from the dangerous world of organized crime. Sensing an opportunity, Capone seized control of the organization, taking over Torrio's vast criminal empire at the tender age of 26. Capone's ascension to power was marked by a wave of violence as he consolidated his grip on Chicago's underworld. He systematically eliminated any rival gangs or individuals who posed a threat to his supremacy, earning a reputation for brutality that would become the stuff of legend. The St. Valentines Day Massacre, in which 7 members of a rival gang were gunned down in a hail of bullets, was a chilling demonstration of Capone's willingness to use extreme violence to maintain his dominance. With Torrio's retirement, Capone now had free rein to expand his criminal operations, and he did so with a ruthless efficiency that was unparalleled in the annals of American organized crime. He oversaw a vast network of bootlegging operations, speakeasies, gambling dens, and prostitution rings, generating an estimated $100 million in annual revenue at the height of his power. Capone's success, however, was not without its challenges. The sheer scale of his criminal empire made it increasingly difficult to maintain the veneer of respectability that Torrio had so carefully cultivated. Capone's name became synonymous with the darker aspects of the Prohibition era, and he found himself the target of intense scrutiny from law enforcement and the public alike. Despite the growing pressure, Capone continued to exert his influence through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and the occasional use of violence. He cultivated relationships with corrupt politicians and law enforcement officials, ensuring that his criminal activities were largely shielded from interference. Capone's ability to navigate the complex web of power and influence in Chicago's political and social circles was a testament to his cunning and adaptability. As Capone's empire continued to grow, so too did the public's fascination with his exploits. He became a larger-than-life figure, a symbol of the excesses and corruption that had taken hold during the Prohibition era. Capone's lavish lifestyle, complete with expensive suits, fancy cars, and extravagant parties, only added to his notoriety, and he became a fixture in the media, both reviled and admired in equal measure. Yet, even as Capone's power and wealth continued to rise, the seeds of his eventual downfall were already being sown. The relentless pressure from law enforcement, coupled with the growing public backlash against his criminal activities, would ultimately lead to Capone's undoing. But for now, he remained the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld, a testament to the dark and dangerous world of organized crime that had taken hold in America during the Prohibition era. Chapter 3: Empire of Sin, the height of Capone's power. As Al Capone tightened his grip on Chicago's criminal underworld, his empire grew to unprecedented proportions. Seizing control of Johnny Torrio's operations with ruthless efficiency, Capone expanded the bootlegging business and diversified into a vast network of illicit enterprises that generated staggering profits. Capone's criminal empire encompassed every facet of the city's vice trade. Illegal breweries, speakeasies, gambling dens, and prostitution rings were all under his control, with a complex web of bribery and intimidation ensuring his dominance. Capone's bootlegging operations alone were estimated to be bringing in over $100 million annually at the height of Prohibition, a figure that would be equivalent to over $1.5 billion today. The young gangster's rise to power was fueled by his ruthless determination and strategic acumen. He carefully cultivated a public image as a successful businessman, often hosting lavish parties and charity events to cultivate an aura of respectability. However, behind the veneer of legitimacy, Capone's methods were anything but benign. Capone's henchmen, known as the Chicago Outfit, enforced his will through a campaign of violence and terror. Rival gangs that dared to encroach on Capone's territory were swiftly eliminated, their members gunned down in brutal fashion. The infamous St. Valentines Day Massacre, in which 7 members of the Bugs Moran gang were murdered in cold blood, sent a chilling message to anyone who might challenge Capone's supremacy. But Capone's empire was not built solely on fear and intimidation. He also understood the importance of political connections and the strategic use of bribery. Capone's web of corruption extended deep into the ranks of Chicago's law enforcement and political establishment, with judges, police officers, and city officials on his payroll. This intricate system of graft and payoffs allowed Capone to operate with near impunity, shielding his criminal activities from the scrutiny of the law. The scope of Capone's criminal enterprises was staggering. His bootlegging operations alone involved a vast network of distilleries, warehouses, and distribution channels, all meticulously organized to evade detection. Capone's control over the city's speakeasies provided a steady stream of revenue, while his gambling dens and prostitution rings added to the vast sums pouring into his coffers. Capone's personal wealth and lifestyle were a reflection of his criminal success. He lived in a lavish mansion, dressed in the finest suits, and surrounded himself with a retinue of bodyguards and henchmen. Capone's penchant for extravagance and ostentatious displays of wealth only added to his notoriety, cementing his image as the quintessential gangster in the public imagination. Yet, despite the scale of his criminal empire, Capone sought to present himself as a legitimate businessman and philanthropist. He donated large sums to local charities, sponsoring soup kitchens and community centers during the Great Depression. This calculated public relations campaign was designed to cultivate a Robin Hood-esque image, portraying Capone as a benevolent figure who provided for the less fortunate while enriching himself through illicit means. However, Capone's attempts to sanitize his public image could not conceal the brutality and ruthlessness that underpinned his rise to power. The bodies of his rivals, the corrupted officials in his pocket, and the countless victims of his criminal enterprises all bore witness to the true nature of Capone's empire. A sprawling, unforgiving domain built on the foundations of violence, greed, and the complete disregard for the rule of law. As Capone's wealth and influence continued to grow, the public's fascination with the notorious gangster reached a fever pitch. His name became synonymous with the darker excesses of the Prohibition era, a symbol of the unrestrained ambition and moral decay that had taken hold of American society. The stage was now set for a reckoning, as the federal government and law enforcement, long cowed by Capone's power, began to mobilize a concerted effort to bring the kingpin down. Chapter 4. Valentine's Day Bloodbath, the massacre that shocked America. As the 1920s drew to a close, Al Capone's criminal empire in Chicago had reached its apex. His vast bootlegging operations, gambling dens, and prostitution rings generated an estimated $100 million in annual profits, cementing his status as the city's undisputed kingpin. However, Capone's ruthless methods and the growing public outcry against his activities had also made him a prime target for law enforcement. In the winter of 1929, the simmering tensions between Capone's organization and his rivals came to a head in a shocking act of violence that would capture the nation's attention and forever tarnish the gangster's public image. The seeds of the conflict were sown months earlier when Capone's longtime ally, George "Bugs" Moran, began encroaching on the bootlegging territories controlled by Capone's North Side gang. Moran, a former boxer turned bootlegger, had built a formidable criminal enterprise of his own and was unwilling to cede any ground to Capone. The two factions engaged in a series of tit-for-tat attacks, with assassinations and bombings becoming commonplace in the streets of Chicago. Capone, ever the strategic thinker, decided to eliminate Moran once and for all. He hatched a plan to stage a fake police raid on one of Moran's illegal breweries, using the element of surprise to gun down his rival and his top lieutenants. The operation was meticulously planned, with Capone's men posing as law enforcement officers and coordinating the timing of the attack. On the morning of February 14th, 1929, the stage was set for the bloodbath that would become known as the St. Valentines Day Massacre. Capone's men, dressed in police uniforms, arrived at the warehouse on North Clark Street, where Moran's gang was gathered. Feigning an arrest, The gunman ordered the men to line up against the wall, then opened fire with submachine guns, killing 7 people in a brutal and calculated display of violence. The carnage was horrific. Witnesses later described the scene as a living hell, with bodies strewn across the floor and the sound of screams echoing through the building. Moran, who had narrowly avoided the attack by arriving late, watched in horror from across the street, realizing he had been the target of Capone's ruthless plan. The shockwaves from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre reverberated far beyond the borders of Chicago. The scale and brazenness of the attack stunned the public and thrust Capone's criminal empire into the national spotlight. Suddenly, the man who had cultivated an image of a respectable businessman was exposed as a ruthless, cold-blooded killer, shattering the facade he had so carefully constructed. In the aftermath, the investigation into the massacre quickly became a top priority for law enforcement. Eliot Ness, the head of the Prohibition Bureau's Untouchables unit, spearheaded the efforts to gather evidence and bring Capone to justice. However, the gangster's vast network of bribery and intimidation made it exceedingly difficult to secure convictions, and Ness and his team faced numerous setbacks in their pursuit of the elusive crime boss. The public outcry over the St. Valentine's Day Massacre also put significant pressure on the federal government to take action against Capone. President Herbert Hoover, who had initially been reluctant to intervene in local law enforcement matters, now ordered the full weight of the federal government to be brought to bear on the Chicago gangster. As the investigation continued, Capone's public image began to crumble. The once admired businessman was now widely reviled as a ruthless killer, with his lavish lifestyle and criminal exploits becoming the subject of intense media scrutiny. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre had shattered the illusion of Capone as a Robin Hood-like figure, and the public's sympathy for the gangster quickly turned to outrage. In the end, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre proved to be a pivotal moment in Capone's downfall. The brutality of the attack and the public's reaction to it forced the federal government to take decisive action, setting the stage for Capone's eventual conviction and imprisonment. The legacy of the massacre would long outlive the gangster himself, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and the darker impulses that can lurk beneath the surface of the American dream. Chapter 5: The Untouchables. The federal government takes on Capone. As the public outcry over the St. Valentine's Day Massacre reverberated across the nation, the federal government finally stepped up its efforts to take down the elusive Al Capone. President Herbert Hoover, determined to curb the scourge of organized crime, ordered the U.S. Department of Justice to mount a concerted campaign against Capone and his criminal empire. The task force assembled for this mission became known as the Untouchables, a select group of federal agents led by the tenacious Eliot Ness. Ness, a young Prohibition agent, had already made a name for himself by leading successful raids on Capone's bootlegging operations. Now, with the full backing of the federal government, he set out to bring the gangster king to justice. Ness and his team faced an uphill battle. Capone had spent years cultivating a vast network of corrupt politicians, law enforcement officials, and judges who protected his interests. Bribery and intimidation were the cornerstones of Capone's power, and he used these tactics to thwart previous attempts to prosecute him. Undeterred, Ness and his Untouchables devised a meticulous plan to gather the evidence needed to finally bring Capone down. They launched a comprehensive investigation meticulously combing through financial records, surveillance reports, and witness testimonies to build an airtight case. One of the key strategies employed by Ness and his team was to target Capone's financial dealings. They recognized that while Capone's violent crimes had evaded prosecution, his lavish lifestyle and the enormous wealth he had amassed through illegal activities could potentially be his downfall. "We can't get him for murder," Ness famously declared. "It's impossible. But if we can get him on income tax evasion, we'll put him away for a long time." The Untouchables methodically traced Capone's financial transactions, piecing together a complex web of illicit earnings, hidden assets, and tax evasion. They worked closely with the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, to uncover the extent of Capone's financial crimes, building a case that would ultimately prove to be his undoing. As the investigation progressed, Capone grew increasingly nervous. He had long relied on his ability to bribe and intimidate his way out of legal trouble. But this time, the federal government seemed determined to break the cycle. Ness and his team proved to be a formidable adversary, immune to Capone's usual tactics. Capone's attempts to subvert the investigation were met with unwavering resistance. When he tried to bribe the jurors in his upcoming trial, the Untouchables swiftly intervened, ensuring that the jury remained incorruptible. Capone's network of corrupt officials was slowly dismantled, one by one, as the federal agents relentlessly pursued their case. The trial itself was a high-stakes affair, with Capone's team of skilled lawyers pulling out all the stops to defend their client. However, the weight of the evidence gathered by the Untouchables proved to be overwhelming. Capone's conviction on tax evasion charges in 1931 was a resounding victory for the federal government and a crushing blow to the gangster's empire. As Capone was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, the public celebrated the triumph of justice over the forces of organized crime. Ness and his Untouchables had proven that even the most powerful and seemingly untouchable criminal could be brought to account through dogged determination and meticulous investigation. The downfall of Al Capone marked a significant turning point in the federal government's war on organized crime. It demonstrated the effectiveness of targeting financial crimes as a means of dismantling criminal enterprises, a strategy that would become a cornerstone of law enforcement's approach to tackling the Mafia and other powerful criminal organizations in the years to come. Moreover, Capone's conviction exposed the deep-seated corruption that had permeated American society during the Prohibition era. The Untouchables' success in cutting through the web of bribery and political influence that had shielded Capone for so long served as a stark reminder of the urgent need for sweeping reforms and a renewed commitment to the rule of law. As the chapter on Capone's reign of terror came to a close, the nation looked to the future with a renewed sense of hope and determination. The lessons learned from the rise and fall of the Notorious Gangster would shape the course of America's ongoing battle against organized crime, setting the stage for a new era of law enforcement strategies and public accountability. Chapter 6: Downfall of a Kingpin, Capone's imprisonment and decline. The thunderous crack of the judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of Al Capone's reign as the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld. Sentenced to 11 years in federal prison for tax evasion, the Notorious Gangster's empire had finally crumbled, brought down not by his violent crimes, but by the meticulous efforts of Eliot Ness and his team of Untouchables. As federal agents escorted the once powerful Capone out of the courthouse, The air was thick with a palpable sense of both triumph and foreboding. For years, the city's residents had lived in the shadow of Capone's brutality, terrorized by the gunfire and bloodshed that marked his ruthless rise to power. Now, they watched with a mix of relief and trepidation, wondering what the future would hold without their infamous crime boss. Capone's downfall had been a long time coming, the result of a relentless campaign by the federal government to bring him to justice. President Herbert Hoover, determined to restore law and order, had ordered the Department of Justice to make Capone's conviction a top priority, even as the gangster continued to evade prosecution for his most heinous crimes. The key to the government's strategy had been to target Capone's financial misdeeds rather than the violent acts that had cemented his reputation. Led by the tireless Eliot Ness, the Untouchables had painstakingly built a case against Capone, meticulously combing through his records and tracing the intricate web of his criminal empire. Their efforts had paid off, exposing Capone's elaborate tax evasion schemes and providing the evidence needed to secure a conviction. As Capone was whisked away to begin his sentence, the power vacuum he left behind in Chicago's underworld threatened to ignite a new wave of violence and chaos. Rival gangs, sensing an opportunity to seize control, jockeyed for position, engaging in bloody turf wars that left the city's streets awash in blood. The once formidable Capone organization, now leaderless, struggled to maintain its grip on the lucrative criminal enterprises that had fueled its rise. In the years that followed, Capone's decline would only accelerate. Incarcerated at the notorious Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, the once imposing figure cut a pitiful figure, his health rapidly deteriorating due to the ravages of advanced syphilis. The disease had ravaged his brain, leaving him increasingly confused and disoriented, a far cry from the ruthless, calculating criminal mastermind who had once terrorized the city. As Capone's mental faculties waned, so too did his influence over the criminal underworld. The power he had once wielded so effortlessly slipped through his fingers as his former lieutenants jockeyed for control of the lucrative operations he had built. The empire Capone had spent decades constructing crumbled around him, a testament to the fleeting nature of power in the world of organized crime. In his final years, Capone was a broken man, a shadow of his former self. Released from Alcatraz in 1939, he returned to his family's home in Florida, where he spent his remaining days in a state of increasing dementia and physical decline. The once feared gangster, whose name had once struck terror into the hearts of Chicagoans, now passed his time in relative obscurity, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. Capone's death in 1947, at the age of 48, marked the end of an era. The man who had come to symbolize the dark underbelly of the American dream had finally been vanquished, his legacy forever tainted by the violence and corruption that had defined his reign. Yet, in the years that followed, his story would continue to captivate the public's imagination, serving as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the enduring power of the criminal underworld. Chapter 7. The Capone Legacy. Echoes of the Prohibition Era. The rise and fall of Al Capone left an indelible mark on American history, exposing the deep-rooted corruption that had festered during the Prohibition era. As the Notorious Gangster's reign came to an end, his legacy reverberated through the decades, shaping the nation's approach to organized crime and the ongoing struggle for law and order. In the wake of Capone's conviction and imprisonment, the power vacuum left in Chicago's underworld ignited a new wave of violence and power struggles. The outfit, as Capone's criminal organization had become known, fractured into competing factions, each vying for control of the lucrative bootlegging and racketeering operations. The ensuing bloodshed and turf wars further demonstrated the pervasive influence of organized crime and the urgent need for comprehensive reforms to address the systemic issues that had allowed Capone's empire to thrive. Beyond the immediate aftermath, Capone's story captured the public's imagination, becoming a cultural touchstone that transcended the boundaries of his criminal exploits. The romanticized image of the charismatic gangster, with his sharp-dressed appearance and perceived Robin Hood-like qualities, resonated with a society that was grappling with the unintended consequences of Prohibition. Capone's rise and fall became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the corrosive impact of unchecked ambition and the fragility of the American dream. Al Capone was a symbol of the darker side of the American experience, observed renowned historian Eric Rauchway. He embodied the excesses and moral compromises that could arise when the pursuit of wealth and power was unrestrained by the rule of law. Indeed, Capone's story exposed the deep-seated corruption that had permeated American society during the Prohibition era. His ability to bribe and intimidate law enforcement officials, as well as politicians and judges, highlighted the urgent need for sweeping reforms to address the systemic issues that had allowed organized crime to thrive. The formation of specialized task forces, such as Eliot Ness's Untouchables, marked a significant shift in law enforcement's approach, demonstrating the effectiveness of targeting financial crimes and disrupting the economic foundations of criminal enterprises. Capone's conviction on tax evasion charges was a pivotal moment, not just for his downfall, but for the broader fight against organized crime, said former FBI agent James Malone. It showed that even the most powerful gangsters could be brought to justice if the focus was on following the money and holding them accountable for their financial misdeeds. The lessons learned from the Capone era would shape the evolution of law enforcement tactics in the decades that followed. The creation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in 1935, and the implementation of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, RICO Act in 1970 were direct responses to the challenges posed by organized crime. These reforms, combined with advancements in investigative techniques and intelligence gathering, helped to disrupt the operations of criminal syndicates and curb the influence of powerful figures like Capone. Yet, the Capone legacy has continued to resonate in popular culture, captivating audiences through films, books, and television series. The romanticized depiction of the gangster lifestyle, with its lavish displays of wealth and power, has at times overshadowed the true brutality and human cost of Capone's reign. This cultural fascination has fueled ongoing debates about the line between admiration and condemnation, and the need to balance historical accuracy with the allure of the criminal narrative. Capone's story is a cautionary tale, but it's also a reflection of the complex and often contradictory impulses that shape our society, said sociologist Dr. Evelyn Diaz. We're drawn to the audacity and bravado of the gangster figure, even as we recoil at the violence and corruption that enabled their rise. Grappling with that duality is essential to understanding the lasting impact of Capone's legacy. As the decades have passed, the relevance of Capone's story has endured. His name has become synonymous with the excesses and moral decay of the Prohibition era, serving as a potent reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the corrosive effects of organized crime. The lessons learned from Capone's rise and fall continue to inform the ongoing efforts to combat the influence of criminal syndicates, underscoring the importance of transparency, accountability, and the unwavering commitment to the rule of law. As we conclude this riveting journey through the life of Al Capone, I hope you've gained new insights into this infamous figure and the era he shaped. If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into more fascinating historical tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By clicking the bell icon, you'll never miss an upload, ensuring you're always at the forefront of our historical adventures. Your support means the world to us, and sharing this video with fellow history enthusiasts helps our community grow. Together, we can continue to explore the complex narratives that have shaped our world, learning from the past to build a brighter future. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next historical deep dive.